Of all the new cards and support, the deck with the most untapped potential is Vaalmonica. What's going on, and welcome back to the channel. And today I have a deck that not many people are talking about. The Vaalmonica strategy has so many different approaches you can take, but regardless, this deck is so much fun to play. We're going to go through the card by card and I'll explain exactly what I'm playing and why I'm playing it, but I'm also going to go over what exactly these cards do. Plus, make sure you stick around to the end because not only am I going to go over why I decided to run the Runics, but I'm even going to go over some of the combos that this deck can do because this deck has so many different options when playing out its hands. But as always, if you haven't already, go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Alright, so the Vaalmonica strategy is so much fun to play, and like I mentioned, when it comes to building the deck or playing out your combos, there's really so many different ways you could approach it. But before we go over why I'm running the Runic engine with these cards, we should probably talk about what the heck this deck is trying to do. In case you didn't know, the deck revolves around these two pendulum scales, and as you use your Vaalmonica spells and traps to gain or take life point damage, each of these scales will gain a resonance counter each time you do so. Angelo revolves around the card effects that let you gain life points, and Demono revolves around the cards that let you take damage. The niche of the spells and traps in this deck is that when you activate them, they always have two effects to choose from. One will have you gain 500 life points and then do something, and then the other, of course, will have you take 500 before doing something. And as long as you have one of these in your scales, you can choose which of the two effects you'd like to activate. The one downside is if you don't have scales set up, then your opponent can choose between the two effects that you get to use, so it's very important to make sure you get them set up. But as you're activating these cards and gaining these effects, you'll start to build up resonance counters on your scales. You'll build up board in the process, but the main point of it is as you build up these counters, you have these amazing link ones that you'll gain access to. These monsters both only take one effect monster to make, so they're super generic and easy to summon. The only catch is you cannot summon them until one of your scales has 3 resonance counters on it. As we go through the deck, you'll start to see the power and quality of these cards are insane. But again, I just wanted to touch on what the heck this deck is trying to do, because I'll be honest, this deck has a lot going on with it. Again, make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to be doing some test hands as well. That way you guys can see exactly what this deck is trying to do. But without wasting any more time, for the first monster in the lineup, it's the newest one to come out of Legacy of Destruction. Cellatress Vaalmonica is essentially the Stratos of the deck. On normal or pendulum summon, you can add any Vaalmonica card from your deck to your hand. This doesn't work when it's special summoned, which is kind of a downside, and you'll see why with one of the new cards we just recently got. But regardless, this card really is the heart and soul of the deck, and so many combos revolve around it. It also has a cool effect where if you control another monster that's not Cellatress, then your opponent can't target it for attacks. But one of the best effects this card has is that anytime it's sent to the graveyard while you have your scales established, its effect will activate and it'll add itself back to hand, and this effect is once per turn. It's also very useful because if you have to start your turn by special summoning her with one of the new cards, then once you have your scales set up and you link her off, it'll add herself back to hand, and then now you're clear to normal summon it and get that effect to search. Every Vaalmonica list should be running 3, but one thing that I'm doing different that at least I've seen other decks are doing is I'm only running 2 of each scale. I'll get into why I'm running this ratio in a sec, but in case you don't know what these cards do, for their pendulum effects, as I mentioned, whenever you activate a card effect that would gain life points, then Angelo will gain a resonance counter, and of course if you use one of the effects that will burn yourself for 500, then Demono's the one that'll gain a counter instead. They both also have a bonus scale effect where Demono, for every resonance counter it has, it lowers your opponent's monsters by 100 attack, and Angelo has a really cool effect where when your opponent declares an attack, you can immediately link summon into one of your Vaalmonica link monsters. This actually goes in theme with the deck because while you also set up your link ones on your turn, a lot of the time you're tagging into them on your opponent's turn. And the monster effects of these cards are also very similar as well. Whenever you have them in the hand, you can activate the effect to discard another card in your hand. Then you can place itself and the other scale from deck to the field. This means no matter which one you have in hand, just by discarding a card, you'll always be able to establish your scales. But also, they have an amazing on-field effect as well. Once per turn, you can banish a Vaalmonica spell spell or trap from the grave and copy the effect that's related to whatever monster is using the effect. As I mentioned, Demono revolves around the burn effects and Angelo revolves around the gain, so those are the effects you'll be able to copy with each of these. But we'll go over more of that later, but that's it for the monsters, believe it or not. And we're not running any hand traps, and that's why I love these Runic cards, but we'll talk about that later. So the Vaalmonicas revolve around copying the normal spells and traps in the grave, but we do have a few other supporting cards that are not normal spells and traps. The first is the field spell, Vaalmonica, the Ecological Voice. We play a Terraforming as well to help search it, but it also grabs us the Runic Fountain. This card is completely insane. When you activate it, of course, you can add any Vaalmonica monster from your deck to your hand, but that's not all this card does. It has an amazing secondary effect that I personally use offensively, at least in this Runic build. While it's on the field at any time during your turn or your opponent's turn, if one of your scales hits the third resonance counter, you can essentially change of heart and steal one of your opponent's monsters. The only thing is you can't attack with it. As mentioned, I use it offensively and it can be used defensively as well, but since we're playing the Runic engine, more times than not, I have the Runic Fountain on the field when it's my opponent's turn. But again, as all these Runic variants go, you're just trying to whittle down your opponents on resources and set up that one-turn kill shot. And yes, one of the Link ones can OTK out of nowhere, and we'll talk about that later. And then the last Vaalmonica spell that is not a normal spell and trap is Vaalmonica Invitare. This is a quick play spell that's essentially a teleport, but also a great card at getting your scale set up. The first effect is you can special summon a Vaalmonica from your deck, but for the rest of the turn, you can't activate other monster effects on the field that are not Vaalmonica monsters. Most of the time, you really don't care about it. Even with your Runic cards like Hugin, you can just use that effect to search before you activate this card. As I mentioned, Celatris does not activate on special summon, but you can still summon it from the deck, and then when you link it off, it'll add itself back once you have your scales, and of course you can normal summon it from there. The other effect you can choose is if you control a non-Pendulum Vaalmonica monster, being Celatris or your Link monsters, you can take two of your Vaalmonica Pendulum monsters with different names from your deck and place one face up in the extra deck and the other in your hand. This is great because obviously any scale that gets added to your hand basically completes the scales by discarding a card, but you also get the free body face up in the extra deck that you will Pendulum summon out and use its effect to copy the effects in grave. Now, as I mentioned, these spells and traps that revolve around gaining and burning life points. First is 3 copies of Vaalmonica Celta. This is, in my opinion, one of the best cards to have in the deck. Again, if you don't have one in your scale, then your opponent can choose between either of these two effects. You can either gain 500 life points and place a card from your hand to the bottom of the deck and draw 2 cards, or the other option is you can take 500 damage and then you can add any Vaalmonica spell or trap from your deck to your hand. I really mean it, both effects are amazing, but like I mentioned, you get to copy these effects as well, so you can get multiple searches or multiple draws. Plus, as a little spoiler, one of the Link ones can quick effect copy these effects on your opponent's turn. So not only can we copy any of the following effects we're about to talk about, but don't forget, we're playing Runic, so if ever you need to draw into more Runic cards, you can always copy this effect to draw more cards. It's so great the synergy this card has. The next Vaalmonica spell I'm playing is 3 copies of Versare. Again, if you have scales, you can pick between the two, and if not, your opponent gets to choose. But you can either gain 500 life points to start excavating the top cards of your deck until you hit any Vaalmonica card, and then that gets added to your hand, or you can take 500 damage, and then you can send any Vaalmonica card from your deck to the grave. This is a great consistency card for the deck, not only potentially digging for more Vaalmonica cards, but as I mentioned, there are times that you already have access to your scales and you don't have access to Celatris, so just by using this card to send it from deck to grave while your scales are up means you can add it from grave back to hand and normal summon it to complete your combo. But the next one I'm playing is actually another one from the new set as well. Once you get going, Disharmonia feels like one of the craziest cards in this deck. This is one of the only ones that don't require a scale face up for you to choose which effect to use, but you do need a scale face up because the first effect when you activate this card is to just add a counter to one of your scales. And not only do we get that free counter on either of our scales, we can also gain 500 life points to then add one of our banished Vaalmonica cards from our banishment back to hand. This is really great, and there's so many cool ways you can abuse this to recycle the cards you need, but also you can take 500 life points to then add one of your Vaalmonica cards from your graveyard back to hand. So it's so versatile, not only at recycling cards, but setting up some really cool combos. And we are playing one of the traps, Vaalmonica Followed Rhythm. There is another trap you could play, but again, I just think this is the best one for this deck. This card, you don't need the scales set up to activate. You actually just need a Vaalmonica monster on the field. Again, it has 2 effects to choose from, but if the monster you control happens to be a Link monster, then you can get both in sequence. The first effect is you gain 500 life points, and then you can destroy a spell or trap on the field. Then the second effect is you take 500 damage, and you can return a monster on the field back to the hand. Back row removal and monster removal all in one card is so great, especially when you use it on the field and then copy the effect with your Link monster, getting to use it twice. Another cool thing to note is in the Tenpai matchup, even if your opponent has the field spell up and a monster on the field, in the main phase 1, you can activate this effect when you have the Link monster. You'll be able to destroy the field spell and then of course gain 500 life points, but then after that in sequence, you get the second effect and you can return their monster to their hand because the field spell will no longer be on the field. It's so great for the deck. But that's it for the Vaalmonica cards. Nothing really too fancy, and I think that's so cool because these cards are so versatile in how you play out your hands. And now for the Runic spells, I'm not going to explain why I'm playing these ratios. It's pretty standard in all these Runic hybrid decks, but really quickly, I just wanted to go over why I'm running these cards and the synergies these cards have. First thing I wanted to touch on is that if you're not playing these cards, then usually you're playing something like Prosperity for consistency. Obviously, the fountains replace that because you get draw power, but the beautiful thing about this Runic engine is, again, not only does this card help you with your combo by getting you free monsters for Link fodder, but it also doubles as non-engine for the deck, being effect negation, removal, and technically you can also deck your opponent out if you get into the grind. These cards do make you skip your battle phase, but it's so easy to whittle your opponent's resources down and wait for that one shot to OTK with our Link 1, which we'll talk about in a sec. Another cool thing to note is that a lot of your Vaalmonica spells and traps can be copied in the grave, so if ever you need to discard one with Yugen, you really don't mind. It's so nice to have a secondary engine that not only doubles as non-engine, but adds consistency to the deck as well. But now, before we hop into the extra deck, I just wanted to showcase these amazing brushed art sleeves from Dragon Shield. They have so many different styles on their website, and the link is down below. Make sure you guys go check them out. Plus, I actually now have a new discount code with Dragon Shield as well. At checkout, make sure you use code COFFEE5. Save yourself 5% at checkout, plus a portion of that purchase comes back to the channel, and it helps me make content for you. But now, hopping into the extra deck, we're actually playing 2 copies of each Link 1. They only take 1 effect monster to make, which is really great, but as mentioned, you need 3 resonance counters on one of your scales to be able to summon these. You can summon the Darulame when your fairy has the 3 counters, and the Zubufra when the fiend has 3 counters. The first effect of Zubufra is that if any time any of your cards would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can just remove 3 counters to protect it instead. This is really great because, like I mentioned, you can tag into this on your opponent's turn, so if they start off with like Lightning Storm or Harpy's Feather Duster, you know you can just tag into this and your stuff's protected. This one also has the quick effect on your opponent's turn to banish one of your Vaalmonica spells and traps and copy the effect. You can choose between the gain or the burn effect with this card, which is really great, but this is the main way to not only copy your trap to get the effect again, but also potentially copy the draw spell to help draw into more Runic spells. But then Darulame is a completely insane Link 1 as well. Again, both of these are just 1 effect monster, which is so crazy, and we're going to talk about why in a sec. But on Link Summon, you can target monsters your opponent controls up to the number of resonance counters you have on your scales and destroy those monsters. If you're able to summon this card, then you know at a minimum that's 3 monsters you can destroy, but I'm telling you, you can wipe entire fields with this card. It's so crazy, especially when you talk about the second effect this card has. On your turn, you can remove 3 resonance counters from any of your scales, and then it can attack up to 3 times during the battle phase. That's right, 7,500 damage in a Link 1 that just takes 1 effect monster. Plus, like I said, when you're summoning it, you're also wiping your opponent's field in the process. This card is completely insane, and you can see how easy it is to OTK out of nowhere. There are times you can tag into this on your opponent's turn. I did mention it before, if your opponent declares an attack while Angelo is in your scale, you can use its effect to Link Summon on your opponent's turn. But that's not the main way we make these on our opponent's turn. It's actually IP Masquerena. This card is so good in this deck, not only because you can go into other cards in the extra deck, which we'll talk about in a sec, but the fact that these cards only take 1 effect monster means when you use IP Masquerena's effect, you don't need any other monsters on the field to be able to summon one of these cards. This is also the go-to card you go into with those extra Runic fusions you have in your EMZ, and that's why I really love that engine in this deck, really just setting up free fodder to help you Link Summon. But we do play a couple of more Link 1s. First is Artemis. You're never really using it for its effect, it just takes a spellcaster to make it, but the main purpose of this card is since it takes a level 4 or lower spellcaster, you can just link off Celatris into this, and if you have your scales established, then of course it gets to add itself back to hand. But again, we'll go over that and more in the combo portion of the video. But we do play one more Link 1, and it is Link Spider. Looks a little weird because we're not playing any non-effect monsters, but this is really just in case you get hit with Nibiru. So it's really nice to have this card in the extra deck, because if you do get hit with Nibiru, you can link into Link Spider, and now you have 1 effect monster on the field. Now, at a bare minimum, even through Nibiru, you get the interruption with your Link 1. Plus, not to mention, there's the trap card in circulation, and of course the Runic spells as well. And now for the last Link monster I'm playing, I think it's no shock, SP Little Knight. So good, especially with all the other extra deck monsters we're playing. There are times that you can make the Link 1 on your turn, so you don't have to tag tag into it with IP Masquerena. We're playing a bunch of rank 4s. First is Baguska. This is actually the main go-to play first turn. Since your monster effect interruptions on your opponent's turn are all link monsters, the Baguska doesn't affect you. So many decks right now struggle with this card, and I think that's what gives this deck a little bit of an edge. In addition, we're also playing a Dugaris. Added draw power for your Runic deck is always really great, but also you can double the attack of your Darulame, making it to where you can attack for 5,000 3 times. Again, another deck that can technically OTK through Prosperity. It's so hilarious, even though we don't play that card. I am playing one more rank 4, and there's a couple of different options you can go with, but right now I'm currently going with Excite on Knight. Not only does the engine help you make rank 4s, but don't forget the Runic spell summons Jerry, which is also a level 4. Normally, you're not using your battle phase until you're trying to go for game, so you can't really play something like Zeus, but I just feel like these 3 right here are the highest impact rank 4s, and I do play another Exceed. Of course, it's Typhon. So good in a Runic based deck, but really it's just great in the format right now. The extra deck is a little tight because of the Runics, and we're only playing 2 copies of Hugin, and as of right now, just 1 copy of Jerry. No other fusions, as much as I'd love a second copy and even a Slipnir, but that's it for the main deck. Let's hop into some test hands. That way you guys can see exactly what this deck's trying to do. All right, let's hop into test hand number 1. We'll give it a good shuffle and a good cut, and what we're hoping to see is a little bit of each engine, but the nice thing is, again, the Runics can draw into more Vaalmonica cards, and of course, the Vaalmonica cards even have the potential to draw into Runics. This first hand is really great, and there's a lot of different ways you could play it out. Again, comment down below if maybe you see some other lines. I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate it. For right now, just to show you what this deck can do, we're going to assume there's no other hand traps being thrown at us, but for the sake of showing what the heck this deck's trying to do, we're going to assume we get to go into our full combo. I'm not going to lie, the Vaalmonica engine can struggle with draw, and that's another thing that's nice about these Runic cards is you can play in the draw phase. So starting things off, we're going to go ahead and use Tip in the draw phase to go ahead and get a search. In this case, I think I'm just going to add the Smiting Storm. That way, if we draw into more names where you know we're not going to hit another copy of this, you just banish the top card off of their deck, so you might know what they're playing now. But now we can use the Smiting Storm. We can summon out Hugin to the field. This is just going to be link fodder because, well, we already have the field spell. Again, this is another way to check for something like Ash Blossom, but we're going to go ahead and use the effect, and we're going to target 2, put them on the bottom, and then draw 2 new cards. It's so nice because you can draw into more Runic cards as interruptions, but also grab more cards for your Vaalmonica engine to go off. The scales like to discard cards to establish them, so discarding Runic spells is a good thing as well because you're just going to recycle them to draw. In this case, I'm actually going to go ahead and activate that effect. We'll go ahead and pitch this Slumber. It gets put in the scale, and we'll grab the other from deck. We don't have access to Celatris yet, but we definitely have ways to get there. Now that we have our scales, we can go ahead and activate our Celta and use its effect to grab a spell. Again, we have the scale, so we can choose the effects. We're going to go ahead and burn ourselves for 5 and get a counter. And you could grab the field spell to grab your Celatris, but then Fountain goes, and that can be a little awkward. So instead, we're going to grab the Inverter. Normally, we're searching this off of Celatris, but instead, it's going to get us access to it. Like I mentioned, these cards are so versatile, and while this isn't going to get to put something in our extra deck, we have ways around that. We'll activate the Inverter, and now we can special summon a Vaalmonica from our deck. Celatris hits the field, and again, the effect does not activate because it's on normal or pendulum summon, but that's no problem because now we can immediately link these off, go into IP Masquerena, and then now that we have scales, this Celatris can add itself back to hand. Of course, we have a normal summon, so right away we're going to summon it and use its effect to search. We're going to add a copy of Demono to hand because, again, the copying effect for the burn effects is the most relevant part. Usually you're trying to get this into the hand or face up in the extra deck, so maybe in another test hand we'll get to see that. But now we can pendulum summon this out from our hand, and we can use its effect copying the Celta in the grave, banishing it, and taking 500 life. The counter will go to 2, but now we can add any of the spells from our deck to our hand or even the trap. So you have a couple of options. You can either add the trap to hand and then use our Disharmonia. This will burn us for 500, but then we can add any of our Vaalmonica spells from our graveyard back to our hand. Technically, you can add any card, but it's nice because we'll now have the 3rd counter, plus we'll have the trap card as well. So another option would be, instead of adding the trap, you can just add the Versare and use the burn effect to send the trap to the graveyard. Again, this gets you the 3rd counter, and it gets the trap engraved to copy on your opponent's turn rather than set it face down. Personally, for me, I think I'd rather have the trap in hand, even though this card technically is more value, just because when you have access to the trap on the field, it essentially means you have the option to use it twice, once on the field and of course copying it from the grave. But now, like I said, we still need to get that 3rd counter, so we're going to go ahead and burn ourselves for 5 and then add a Vaalmonica card from our grave to our hand. This just gets us more follow-up for the turn after, and now we're all set up to go into our Link 1. We're actually not going to make that right now. We're actually going to go into the Baguska. Like I mentioned, this is a big piece to your end board, and here you go. This is the basic setup that we're trying to attain most of the time. IP Masquerena, that can then tag into our Link 1 on the opponent's turn, Baguska as our Floodgate, plus the Trap as removal. Don't forget, your opponent's monsters are all going to be shrunk by 300 attack, at least currently. If ever your opponent was able to get multiple bodies on the field, threatening the removal of your Baguska with something like SP, the Trap is really nice to have as that additional removal. But again, if you need even more, then you can use Masquerade's effect. Zabufra will hit the field, and now at any time we can use its effect, and we can copy the Trap in the grave, banishing it to then get both the effects again. Oh, and technically you need to go into the Vaalmonica Link monster first before activating the Trap, because, you know, you have to control a Vaalmonica monster to use it. When you use the on-field effect, it'll gain a counter for each, and then again, when you copy it, once again, you'll get 2 more counters as well. Oh, and I completely forgot, I'm sure some of you are already commenting, when I activate this, I get a free counter as well, so this technically should already be at 3 now. Again, it's not super relevant, but you need these counters, so it's very important to make sure you keep track of them. There's a lot going on with this deck, so it's easy to forget. I guess another crazy thing is if somehow they outed Baguska, or maybe had like an Imperm or Droplet, then now with how you're set up, not only do you have the Runic spells to protect you, but if they technically declare an attack, then now you can just Link summon into the other Link, because now we have 3, and you could wipe the field for essentially 8 monsters. Again, this is the basics of what it's trying to do. Again, sorry I slipped up about the 1 additional counter. There's so much that goes on with this deck, it's easy to lose track. But again, let's go ahead and do another test hand. This deck is so much fun to play. All right, so let's hop into test hand number 2. Again, a good shuffle and a good cut. We'll see what our deck gives us. I think the last one was really cool because, again, it showed we did not start with Celatris, but we were still able to get to it with the teleport in the deck. And here in this hand, we have 1 Runic spell, we have the field spell, 2 copies of Celta, and of course 1 Versare. As far as Vaalmonicas go, the Vaalmonica engine is looking really nice right now, but with the 1 Runic spell, that's okay, we still have the potential to draw into more. So again, for combo's sake, we'll assume we're not getting hit with hand traps, but again, there's different ways you could check for them along the way. A cool way to check for like Ash and Imperm is in the draw phase, we'll go ahead and use the Freezing Curses. This will summon the Hugin, and we'll activate the effect. Of course, this is all in the draw phase. We're going to discard the extra copy of our Celta. This is going to pick up our Fountain, and even though this engine's not going to do anything else right now, still we have that extra body for Link summoning and the potential to draw into more cards if we use the secondary effect to draw. We're going to go ahead and enter the main phase 1, and we're going to go ahead and fire off our field spell to go get our Stratos. Celatris gets added to hand, and then we'll normal summon it and use the effect to search. Here I'm just going to pick up Invitare, and of course we can activate it right away, grab ourselves both our scales. Again, this is why I feel like 2 and 2 of each is fine, because you have so much draw power and deck thinning. You're going to see these cards, and again, you have so many ways to the Stratos to get to these as well. One gets added to the extra and the other to the hand, and now we can activate its effect to scale itself by discarding a card and grabbing the other from the deck. We're deck thinning so much in the process, just making the Runic cards that much better and more likely to draw into. Now we can go ahead, link these 2 off, go once again into our IP Masquerena, and now our Celatris will activate, putting itself back in the hand because we have both of our scales. This is usually the basic combo for the Vaalmonica engine. Get this back in hand while having the other in the extra. Now you can perform your Pendulum Summon, summoning one from the hand and then summoning the other from the extra. We have a couple of options we can copy, which is really cool, but don't forget we also have the 1 in hand, which is also another really great thing. But now we're just trying to think of ways to help get the counters on our Demuno. So we're going to activate the effect, copy the Celta in the grave. We'll take another counter, take 500 damage, and get a search for a spell or trap. Again, another cool utility thing that isn't relevant right now but does come up is that if ever you have your scales and you need the Celatris, you can also use this effect to then send one from deck to grave, and now you have scales, you can add it to hand. Here I'm going to add the Disharmonia from deck to hand, and right away we're going to activate it, and I'm not going to forget this time, we're going to get that bonus counter on this scale, and really you could put it anywhere, but I know I'm going to be able to take more damage in the process, so we'll take 500 damage, getting to 200 counters, and now we can add any of the cards from our grave to our hand. We'll add that Versare, and now you have a couple of options that you can do right here. Obviously we can still activate this in hand. We only copied the effect, we never activated it. This will get us the 3rd counter that we need. It also gets us the trap, and we'll have the basic setup that we wanted from the last combo, but instead I'm going to do the latter. I'm going to go ahead and use this. We're going to go ahead and search a spell or trap. Followed Rhythm gets added to hand, and again we get that 3rd counter. And now while we're at it, just to get the other counter, we'll go ahead and activate this card. We'll give it a good shuffle, and we'll gain another counter, and then we'll excavate until we hit a Vaalmonica card. And in this case, it looks like we're hitting a bunch of Runics, but once we hit a card, there's the field spell. We can add it to hand. That's great, followed follow-up for the turn after. Now, just like last time, we can go ahead and make that Bagooska. We can set the trap face down, and it's up to you if you want to play the fountain. I personally would, because now we have the option to draw cards on our opponent's turn. I just wanted to once again mention that if we did get hit with Nibiru here, we can link that token into the Link Spider, and then link the Link Spider off into the Zabufra, and we still have the trap, plus this being able to copy the trap. Or, like I mentioned, now we have a Celta in the grave. We could potentially copy this, draw 2 cards after bottom decking this card from our hand, potentially hitting more Runic cards to interrupt with. And also, I forgot to mention, on your next turn, when you go to detach for Bagooska for the maintenance cost, you have your scale, so this just gets to add itself back to hand, giving you more follow-up once you change that Bagooska to attack mode. But again, the Bagooska's flooding them out currently, and the IP Masquerena can then tag into SP if Bagooska gets outed, or like I mentioned, Zabufra is the go-to play. This is also really great because, like I mentioned earlier, if your opponent starts with like Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm, you can chain that IP Masquerena, summon the Zabufra, and then you can remove 3 counters to protect your entire back row. But again, now you can destroy a spell or trap and bounce a monster. Again, this will get you more counters, and that could have been a reason why you might have wanted to leave the other field spell up instead of the fountain, because you knew you were going to hit 3 on your opponent's turn. You would have been able to use the effect to steal one of their monsters as well. But again, right now we just wanted to just showcase that we have the option to potentially draw into more spells in the process. It's up to you how you want to play out that turn. And again, I don't really think there's a wrong answer. But again, if you wanted to, you can copy the trap once again, getting 2 more counters on each. Or like I mentioned, we can copy this. We can bottom deck a card, draw 2 new cards, and hopefully hit a spell. In this case, we get a Stratos and a Flashing Fire. And this is how the deck starts snowballing out of control. This is probably the most awkward way to do it, by having to try to draw into them. But a lot of the times you already have these cards in circulation. Like with the first combo, we had 2 Runic spells already in our hand. And there are times that you open with 3 and you just start digging for cards to get your Vaalmonica cards going. But now technically we have another interruption, potentially drawing more cards in the process. This deck is so much fun to play, and again, it puts up so much awkward game states for your opponent to have to play against. This deck has so many different lines and ways you can play it out, and again, there's so many different variants and builds as well. You don't have to play the Runic cards. I hope this video helps showcase what this deck can do, and if you want more Vaalmonica content, please let me know down below. This deck has so much potential, and there's new support on the horizon, and I cannot wait till they're released. But here's hoping to see you on the next one. Peace.